So I'm very happy to have with me today a good friend, Joan Grajuan Thomas. She is a communication specialist by vocation, and by avocation, she is a community activist and advocate, and she is currently in her first term as a trustee for the Village of Portchester. She's led our community in a Juneteenth celebration for a number of years now, and she and her husband have led a commemoration at the African American Cemetery in Rye for many, many years, I think. So we've all benefited from the way in which she's brought those things into the community and shared them with us. So Joan, it's very good to have you with me again today.
Good to be with you, Jim. And I would also like to introduce my daughter, Kia, who might interject. And, I think it's always helpful to have a young perspective on things.
Great to have her. So the subject today is Kwanzaa. What is Kwanzaa?
Well, Kwanzaa is a uniquely African-American holiday or celebration, if you will. It started by a professor, Karenga, who was with UCLA, and he was a professor of African studies and culture. And he started the holiday in 1966, so it's 54 years old. And the holiday is based on 7 principles and the Nguzo Saba, and each principle reflects on a different aspect of life. The holiday itself is built and based on the harvest. And so that plays a huge role in the commemoration of it.
How does your family observe it?
I think that we observe it really all year long, in a way, right? Because some of the principles are things such as supporting your, Black-owned businesses. And another principle talks about leaving your community better than the way you found it. And certainly in our efforts to lift up the souls buried at the African American Cemetery, the potential spirits of those who might have lived in those quarters that are by Lyon Park, and certainly the work that I've tried to do in the community in terms of not just my role in office, but as an activist with the Sustainable Portchester Alliance, raising awareness around the need for affordable housing and responsible development, is, I think, my way of celebrating. And so the 7 days in recent years, I have really dedicated toward noting each day on my social media in an effort to expose more people to the holiday itself.
So when does it begin?
It begins on December 26th, which is the day after Christmas, and it ends on January 1st, which is New Year's Day.
Okay. So you've got some items there that you can show us for show and tell?
I do, actually. So these are the candles, the green, black, and red candles. And they signify, the black candle signifies the Black people, the African people. The green symbolizes the land. The red symbolizes the blood that was shed. Certainly, we're talking about the transatlantic slave trade crossing. And here you have, a collection of vegetables representing the harvest. They sit on a mat, a woven mat, that's called a mkeka. And we have our pitcher that for many cultures on the continent use to pour libations. And that's really just a tribute to our ancestors. And so we pour libations in their honor, recognizing their sacrifices and contribution to the culture in our community.
Mhm. Okay.
Yep. And so I also have just a couple of little random things. Kwanzaa tries to be the, what's the word, anti-commercialism holiday.
Mhm.
Again, it's based on the harvest, which is a wonderful time. But it also speaks to, as I mentioned earlier, supporting Black-owned businesses, making handmade gifts rather than buying them.
And I think that as time goes by and as we bring more awareness to, not just Kwanzaa, but so just like Juneteenth is now, is becoming more and more of a bigger deal. Every year I'm like, all right, guys, so what are we doing for Kwanzaa? We gotta, recognize all of it. And I remember when you used to come to school.
Yes.
My elementary school.
Yes.
And we would do our Kwanzaa presentation for classes. And I love doing them.
Yeah. And these are the principles, umoja, which means unity. So that's the first night. Kujichagulia is the second principle, or self-determination, to define ourselves, name ourselves, create for ourselves, and speak for ourselves. And that allows us to tell our history and to tell our stories. Ujima is collective work and responsibility, that our sisters and brothers' problems are our problems, and that we need to work together. Ujama, shared work, wealth and the good of the people, cooperative economics, owning our own stores, supporting our own stores. Another principle is Nia, meaning purpose, building and developing our community in order to restore our people to their traditional greatness. And that again comes with learning and understanding. The great civilizations of Egypt. And Kuumba is creativity. This is a drum dance troupe. Creating your own gifts, sewing, painting, music. I believe France has just approved of the repatriation of many artifacts and art that they took from the African continent, that they are returning. And Imani means faith. To believe with all our heart in our people, our parents, our teachers, our leaders, and the righteousness and victory of our struggle. So those are the 7 principles to be celebrated on each of the 7 days of Kwanzaa. And again, the last day is Karambe. It's a celebration where family comes together, and of course it's based in food, cooking the dishes that we've come to love and know. And that's another way, right, is also in cooking, finding recipes that you can make at home, that are grounded and have its traditions in different African cultures. So that's another way of trying to celebrate.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for all your help. And we look forward to learning and growing and continuing to work for a better future.
Thank you.
Thank
Good to be
you.
in the fight with you. Merry Christmas,
Merry
Happy New Year, and
Christmas,
Happy
New Year,
Kwanzaa.
Happy Kwanzaa.
Have either of you been to Africa?
I have. I've had the supreme opportunity to travel twice to the continent. Both times I went to Ivory Coast, and I'm sorry, both times I went to Senegal, and once I went to Ivory Coast. And um, I cannot even tell you the feeling of belonging
Mm,
that came over me when I started walking in the streets,
mm, mm.
and the majority of people looked like me and were the business leaders and the government officials and the store owners and the customers. And um, I also had a chance to visit Goree Island, which was one of the departure points for the transatlantic slave trade.
Mm, mm.
And that was life changing.
Yeah.
And it would be absolutely wonderful if we had some sort of foundation that could gift young people that trip. And if I can also share with the audience that at one point we had Kia attend African Culture School in New Rochelle, and um, it was as much of a learning experience for her dad and I as it was for her, because there are just things that we did not know and did not realize. And so much of what we enjoy and experience now had origins in many different African cultures. I think it helps our students to understand that it isn't just about slavery. Many of our students feel, insecure when that lesson plan gets taught, because that's all we ever hear about. We
Yeah.
never hear about the great culture of Timbuktu, or Kenya, or any of the great civilizations that existed on the continent. Never.
Mm,
It's not part of our curriculum, not until you get to college, and that's late.
mhm. I'd have to say that I got all through my schooling, uh, grade school, high school, college, without really taking any courses that had any significant amount of time dealing with Africa or even African Americans, as you say, beyond there was slavery, the slaves were freed. End of story.
Right.
Um,
Right, that's about it.
and I can remember being introduced to Langston Hughes, the
Oh,
poetry of Langston Hughes, by a gentleman by the name of Raphael Warnock, who was in seminary with me at the same time.
and who
And
is now running for Congress.
but in seminary, I mean, I was very fortunate that the seminary I went to had James Cohen as a professor, and had a lot of resources and a lot of people who could share their experience.
Hmm.
So how do you think your neighbors in a diverse community like Portchester, how can they participate? How can they share? I mean, we don't want to think of this as just being for African Americans, right? It's just like African American History Month is not just for African Americans. It should really be for all Americans, right?
Sure,
So is this holiday
sure.
something we would all share in somehow?
Well, I think so. I mean, and even so, something I think would be good for all of us to do is to understand each other's cultures and traditions, right? Um, so in honoring the principles, which we can quickly review, um, it's and we saw a lot of that starting over the summer because of the social unrest after George Floyd's murder.
Hmm, hmm,
Um, I had a lot of white folks of good conscience calling me to
hmm,
ask me, well, what do I do? What can I
hmm,
do?
hmm,
And, a lot of that just starts with being informed and educating yourself and reading.
hmm,
And, just with the poems of Langston Hughes or the writings of James Baldwin,
hmm,
um, pick up a book and read.
hmm,
And so, yes, I think people can participate if it's coming from a place of
hmm,
genuine, authentic, wanting to learn and understand, and um, and to gain a deeper respect and appreciation
hmm, hmm.
for the richness that is the cultures that come from the various countries on the continent.
Yeah. I don't know if someone as young as Kia really can appreciate. I mean, for me, I've hit the half century mark. and to see the progress that we've made over 50 years. I mean, I remember when Jesse Jackson was running for president, I remember getting to shake his hand once and being thrilled at that. But people saying, why is he running?
Mhm.
You know, I mean, what possible reason could he have? He must have some agenda that he's trying to do this. And I can
Ulterior
remember,
motive.
and I can
Right.
remember when David Dinkins became mayor of New York, and that was a thrilling moment. So to think about how much progress we've made to having a black man as president, and in 30 days, a woman of color as vice president, and then all the progress that women have made. I mean, things like you know, women's sports and the emphasis we've tried to make on that. That's been a huge difference in my lifetime, to see how that's had a very important impact. So I grew up
Sure.
in a pretty sheltered childhood, but I think there were a couple of things that broke through. One of which was Sesame Street, which, kind of looking back on it, I didn't quite realize at the time, but now I realize that that was an urban setting,
Yes.
and it wasn't. It was perfectly natural, and it was just, you know, here's our neighborhood, and here's the people who live in our neighborhood.
That's right.
Um, and so little things like that have had to accumulate over time and build up year by year. And we
Mhm.
also know that as we make progress, we also see resistance to that progress, right?
Mhm.
We saw this past weekend white nationalists making their presence known violently and hatefully, and in our nation's capital and other places, churches being vandalized, targeted, African American churches, and signs being torn down, signs saying Black Lives Matter, torn down and publicly burned, uh,
Yep.
as a
Yep.
way of really saying that they don't want Black lives to matter, right? I mean, that they don't want Black voices to be heard, and they don't want to live in a country that has that kind of an understanding of itself.
That's right. And that is, I think, a direct result of, um, the poor education that's been received. Not, and not so much poor, but uneven, and and again, not representing the actual facts of what we know to be true, with regard to the transatlantic slave trade, but even before that, right? The indigenous people. We have been fed um, misinformation, and now misinformation is ruling the day again,
Yeah, yeah,
right? It's almost come full circle,
yeah.
and that's a sad thing.
Hmm.
But I think over time, not to mimic Dr. Martin Luther King, I may not see it,
Yeah,
but we're going to get there.
yeah,
I think slowly but surely.
yeah, yeah. Not without a lot of effort and a lot of organizing and a lot of struggle.
Right. And, you know, I oftentimes compare it to, when we have earthquake, right? An earthquake are the tectonic plates that are colliding.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, they cause damage,
Mm-hmm.
but they also create new
Yeah,
structures.
yeah,
And so what we're experiencing is the tectonic plates crashing into each other.
Friction.
And there is going to be more destruction, unfortunately. There is going to be more damage. But the new that will come from that, I hope will be a better thing.
And things can always be rebuilt. We can't bring people back from the dead. So that's what I try and tell my friends, who say, oh, but the riots and all that, destruction. I said, yeah, they can repair that police car.
Mm-hmm.
They'll be okay.
Mm-hmm. That CVS will get rebuilt.
That CVS will be built, can be rebuilt.
Right.
George Floyd cannot come back from the dead.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it was very disheartening to read a lot of the opinions in our local paper. One recently was, aimed to blame George Floyd's the counterfeit money or the alleged counterfeit money he had or whatever. to justify his death. And I hear that over and over again from people, and I have to correct them, because that's how can you justify somebody's death like that? I think that people just look for a reason to justify Black murder by the police, and I think that that is a real problem that faces my generation today, because we want to reform or abolish, and whether that is defunding and reinvesting in the community, or figuring out some other way that the police can be helpful, but they don't. I personally don't think they don't need all that money. That's just me.
And if the money went into education.
Exactly, into the education that we need, because it is a privilege to have a curriculum that only portrays one side of the story, and our history being an elective.
And just, I mean, education is not very good for a lot of people in this country, and that money could really have a big impact if it was used otherwhere. So you talked about disinformation and misinformation, and that's a big topic now because of social media, right? People spreading conspiracies.
Right.
And really, racism is nothing more than that. It's just a lie being spread. Somebody came up with a lie and just said, we're going to spread this. And, probably knowingly on the part of certainly some people. And, patriarchy and all the other hateful ways of dividing people up. I'd have to say that Facebook, there's been a lot of talk about how damaging Facebook has been to our politics. But it's also an opportunity. I see people posting things on Facebook, and that gives me an opportunity to realize what they're thinking and what they're hearing and what they're sharing.
Right.
That, I see people sharing things on Facebook, and I can say, how do you know that? Where did you hear that from?
Right.
And sometimes that goes in one ear and out the other, but I think it also maybe chastens some people to realize that what they're saying is not going to be accepted by everybody anyway.
Right. And, I think it shouldn't be that we want to run people underground to become invisible. The harder work is to get them to realize and awaken. That's really hard.
There's also a limit to education. I mean, we can't expect education to really bear all the weight of what we want to accomplish, because it won't really. It'll do a lot, but it has limits that we can't say. We can't say we don't have any other tools to use in terms of organizing and.
That's true, but it is a foundation upon which we can, grow and build from there.
Yeah, but we also got ways of building power and building cooperative power and.
And just to bring it back to today and our community, we saw yesterday, again, a group of restaurant owners gathering to rally and protest about the restrictions due to the virus. And, one of the things that I've been saying to these groups of people that have been gathering is, yes, we need to survive this, and we will. But we need to stay organized. We need to come together, not just because of this crisis, but when the crisis is over, we need to, stay organized so that we can advocate for the things that makes our community better. And so this is a brief description of Kwanzaa, and people can visit the official Kwanzaa website, and that's what the URL is, officialkwanzaawebsite.org. Let's see. So so here are the symbols, as you can see, the candles and the cup and the fruits of the harvest. The mazao represents the harvest. The mkeka is the mat that I was telling you about. And the kanara, symbolic of our roots, our parents, the continent of Africa. The muhindi, or the corn, corn is a foundational staple food product. The kakombe cha umoja, which is the unity cup in order to pour libations, and the candles. are also symbolic. And the zawadi are gifts, again, handmade perhaps, or gifts that are to help understanding and learn. And also it's a time to celebrate our culture. And so I put my hands on several books that we had collected over the years to read to our own children. This is a series of books that is called Legends of the World. And it uses different, stories to share the culture and to have our children become more familiar and aware of the greatness that existed in Africa.
Beautiful. So what do you think Kwanzaa might mean during this time of pandemic? Does it have take on a new meaning, or does it have a special meaning for us during this pandemic?
Well, I think it takes on very special meaning now, because people are suffering so greatly because of loss of income and livelihood, that I think we need to take stock in what really matters, as opposed to worrying about buying things and having boxes under the tree. Certainly my family celebrates Christmas as well. But I think Kwanzaa really requires that we think about those things that have a much deeper meaning.
Mm-hmm. I want to thank you both very much for bringing this to us. And
Absolutely. And thank you so much for everything that you do to bring education and information and just broadening people's horizons. It really, we really do appreciate you and everything that you've done in the community, Jim.
thank you. Thank you. It's good that I have partners that can help me, because I can't do it by myself. I guess
That's right.
We need each other to do these things.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah. So I want to thank you both again, and whenever we can help you. I know you came to the church one time and talked about sustaining Port Chester, sustainable Port Chester.
Right.
I saw that on Facebook the other day. It popped up in my Facebook feed when you came here, and we took some pictures of people with signs about.
That's right. Yes, yeah. That's right. That's right. I remember seeing that memory. Yeah, thank you for that. And again, this is something that, we need to do every day. You can't, it's not just a one-time thing.
Yeah. And this is the time of year when we kind of think about how we rededicate ourselves and evaluate how well we're doing and what progress we're making, and making sure that we haven't let these things lapse, as we, sometimes do as we get busy.
That's right. That's right. And particularly, for people who are in need, this is the time of year where people feel very generous. So we need to remember that in February and March, the need is just as great, certainly, throughout the year.
Okay, so I'll edit that down and I'll share it with you.
Terrific. Thanks so much.
Thank you, guys.
Have a good day.